week's episode of the Visual Studio Remote Office Hours. We had a little thing there with the camera. My apologies.
Oops, sorry. I just put my microphone on.
We're live, Sean. Hello and welcome. So this week is kind of an interesting topic that I want to talk to Sean here about because, Visual Studio is a lot of different things. And one of those things is the website. Just like any other product or any other company out there, of course, there's a website. And how exactly, what's the role of the website? Managing it, what does that mean? And like, what is the purpose of having a website specific to a product? And how do you make any determinations about what's relevant to the users and all those sort of things? I hope, Sean, that I can learn that from you today. So thank you so much for showing up here.
Yeah, thank you, Mads. Hello, everybody. Again, thanks to everyone out there for joining us today. So just a quick introduction of myself here. My name is Sean Iyer. I am a senior program manager with Microsoft. I've been with Visual Studio for 3-4 years now. Customer feedback and customer satisfaction are some of my most passionate areas. Mads and I work together on customer feedback. Now I'm focused on VisualStudio.com and as well as customer satisfaction for Visual Studio product family. So That's kind of a quick intro.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Sean. And I will say to everyone currently watching live on YouTube or on Twitch, feel free to ask any questions in the comments, right? So we'll get to them all. Usually that's what we do. And of course, you can ask specifically about today's subject, but you can also ask other Visual Studio related questions. And Sean, I think we should just start with like, what is VisualStudio.com's purpose? What do we use it for?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maz. So VisualStudio.com, the way I think about it is the front door, the main entryway to come into the Visual Studio product family world, and where you can explore, discover, learn, download, acquire any of our tools, and even beyond that, just to keep in touch with whenever there are new things happening in the Visual Studio world, new services being updated, new features being released, to sort of keep on top of what's going on. And also, you can use VisualStudio.com as sort of the place as a starting point where you, it's like looking at the map when you go into a zoo, right? Where do you want to go from today? Do you want to go see the aquarium? Do you want to go see the African animal? So it's the place where you can come in and pretty much find the right resources, destinations within the sphere of Visual Studio that you want to go today.
So it's kind of like a product catalog in that sense.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It's not where you actually often end up with when you go into deeper learning mode. This is where you come in, you figure out based on your needs, based on what you want to do, you figure out where to go, and then you end up going to, after you've learned sort of an introductory information about, let's say you're interested, I just heard about code spaces. What is that? And after you learn about that a little bit, for deeper learning, you might end up going into GitHub Codespaces site. You may go into documentation, most likely. So, but it helps you get to the right place based on your needs.
Okay, so it's a kind of a place to start your journey, and then when you want to learn more, it links off to different places, basically.
Exactly. That's the best way to think about it. That way, it can be, especially if you're a beginner, jumping right into documentation, jumping right into too much of details can be overwhelming. So if you're looking for more introductory information, whether if you're new to Visual Studio or new to a service or a capability in Visual Studio, it's a good place to start and then sort of steep yourself further.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess it's also the place you go if you want to download Visual Studio.
Exactly. So I might be burying the lead here a little bit, but this is where this is the main hub for downloading Visual Studio. No matter how you come into the Visual Studio world, once you've decided you wanted to download a particular tool, whether it's Visual Studio on Windows, VS for Mac, and so on, eventually you end up coming into VisualStudio.com to initiate that download.
Okay, so we have the page for you to download Visual Studio and also for you to learn about Visual Studio. What if you already have Visual Studio and you don't have to learn, you already know your way around? Is there anything for like existing users there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. Yeah, like oftentimes, if you casually, occasionally use VisualStudio.com to download, or maybe you visited VisualStudio.com when you started out, and then you haven't been there for a while, you might be wondering that, right? Yeah, absolutely. So whenever something exciting happens, let's say we release a new capability, or we have a new preview program. Oftentimes, you have, of course, we have the public preview, but sometimes we have this real special early previews that are offered to a limited number of developers based on their interest. And so we can sort of very early on in creating a feature or capability, we can work with the group of users to really understand their needs and refine our product to get to a point where it can be a public preview. So for things like that, as well as anytime some exciting thing is happening, like let's say a build event is coming up or another event is coming up, and we have some presentations and some exciting things happening, all of that information is available on VisualStudio.com. So I'll actually show you a little bit later on, sort of a hands-on on VisualStudio.com, how these things look.
Excellent.
But yeah,
so you're
so
going to be sharing your screen. That's
yeah,
good.
let's do that.
Okay, so I know there's something called my.visualstudio.com. Is that part of your portfolio as well?
It is not, but it is related. I don't work a lot on my.visualstudio.com.
Yeah, I think those are subscriptions, right? That's all the benefits you get if you're a subscriber. You get like Azure credits, you get like learning, plural site courses and whatnot.
That's exactly right. So yeah, so you can kind of think of that as one of the destinations you go to from VisualStudio.com. Maybe once you have purchased Visual Studio. Again, beyond download, I'll be talking about this as well in a little bit. Beyond download, once you've made a decision what edition of Visual Studio is right for you, let's say you go ahead and purchase a subscription. At that point, My becomes sort of your go-to destination for a lot of things to manage your subscription, and you can get support. You can get the support from my as well as from VisualStudio.com as well. But there you get more of a view of Visual Studio that is pivoted on your subscription. So it's more individualized versus VisualStudio.com is more generic.
Right. Okay. So Sean, we already have a couple questions here. So let's take a look at this one from Pratik. Can we do coding online as a tool? Like, does VisualStudio.com have anything there for coding online?
Yeah, so that's a great question. On VisualStudio.com, we were talking about www.visualstudio.com. There is nothing there to do coding right there on the site, and that's because the site is meant to just to give you an introduction, give you sort of that doorway to come into the Visual Studio world, and from there you go to a destination where you can actually do coding online. And we have the browser-based Visual Studio tooling. That would be where you eventually want to end up when you want to do coding online.
So the GitHub code spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think also the .NET team actually have online coding. So if you go to .net, let me write that out. I always get a little bit confused about that web URL here. So let me just write it out. So .net, and there it is. If you go there, then there should be like some online C# coding capabilities there for you to like learn about the language and so on.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's another site. You will find that from VisualStudio.com, depending on your needs, if your focus is .NET, ASP.NET, you'll see that VisualStudio.com ends up leading you there for tutorials and getting started guides and things like that.
Yeah.
So since we're talking about that, why don't we dive in and take a look? All right, I just wanted to kind of share some high-level, interesting things about VisualStudio.com before we actually go to the site and take a look at what's going on. So, about 5 to 6 million of you visit VisualStudio.com each month. So like Mads mentioned, as we talked about, VisualStudio.com is the main place for downloading Visual Studio product family tools. It's Visual Studio or Visual Studio for Mac, or also where you can actually start your download for Visual Studio Code. And then VS Code is another sister site, just like .NET, and where you do more with VS Code. To close out the year, 2020, in December, we asked visitors to VisualStudio.com what were some of the main reasons why they come to the site. And the top 4 reasons we heard were, of course, as you can guess, to download Visual Studio, to learn about Visual Studio features and capabilities, whether you're new to Visual Studio or just to learn the latest changes and incremental improvements that are happening. And then once somebody has decided on what product to go with, finding pricing, comparing between different editions of Visual Studio, licensing information, and so on. And then also, folks are looking for technical or product support. They also, the first place you think of as a customer is, oh, let me just go to VisualStudio.com and see how we can get support. What are the different ways I can get support? And that's something you can accomplish by going to VSCom, and then it gives you really nice roadways into the right place within support.
Mm-hmm. So when I look at these 4 things, right? Okay, so download Visual Studio is 80%. Why people go in? Is there how do you know that people are successful? So let's say they come to download or they come to learn more about Visual Studio features, right? How do we know that they're then successful at doing those jobs at VisualStudio.com? And is there a way for us to know that? And if the site doesn't do what we need it to do for the user, do we then make any changes? And how do we know what changes to make?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we spend a lot of our energy on this, what Mads you've brought up. So what we do is we look at how many visitors come to our site, how many of them initiate download, and then we look at how many of them successfully complete download. And then we have a funnel view of the customers who are downloading. From the point they download, are they able to actually launch the installer? How many of them are able to successfully complete the installation? What workloads do they pick during the installation process? And then once they have installed, how many of them launch Visual Studio? How many of them are able to successfully open a project or a folder? How many of them are able to, how many of them use Visual Studio on a regular basis, multiple times within a week, multiple times within a month, which all provide an indication of the ease with which our customers are able to use the product, not just only download, but get really deep into it and accomplish and what they really want to do. So we look at all these different stages in the process, and we try to understand what customers are experiencing, what frustrations or problems they may be experiencing, and then we try to address them. Oftentimes, it's better to address things early on, right? So for example, VisualStudio.com is where this whole journey starts. So what we like to do is, instead of somebody, let's say, downloading the wrong product for them, for example, let's say I have a low-powered machine, and Visual Studio Enterprise Edition may not be the right thing in that situation for me. On the other hand, I may be evaluating Visual Studio for my company, and I may be looking to buy a subscription. Maybe Visual Studio Community may not be the best place to start. My journey will be easier if I start with the trial of Enterprise Edition. So one thing we have done recently, we have learned from our customers that sometimes choosing the right product can be confusing, especially if they're really new to the Visual Studio product family. So we've introduced elements on the VisualStudio.com page that are aimed at making this journey easier, more fun, and avoid any extra effort or work for our customers in the process of getting to the right place. So let me just show you real quick. On VisualStudio.com, hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yep.
Okay, great. So previously, what we had was sort of the three choices you see here. Do I want to download Visual Studio, VS Code, or VS for Mac?
Can you like zoom in a little bit, like Control+ in the browser?
Yeah. How does that look?
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. All right. So, you could go in, learn more. Of course, we have many visitors who know exactly what they want. They can go ahead and download. Hey, I just want Enterprise Edition. That's what I'm evaluating. It's pretty clear to me. But if I really don't know, I'm a beginner, all of this looks overwhelming to me. All these products, where do I go? Where do I start? We have, added things that make that easy for you. So let's say I know nothing about Visual Studio. I'm starting here, and I can say, maybe all I know is I am really interested in developing a mobile app.
Hey, Sean, hang on. I think your microphone is like hitting your zipper or something like that.
All right. Is it better?
Yeah, let's try that.
All right. Okay. So maybe my goal is to develop a mobile app. Or maybe my goal is I just want to learn .NET and C# development. Or maybe I'm limited to developing on, I just have a MacBook, or I just have a Windows machine, and I have to do my development on there. So this tool at the top we introduced late last year helps you basically complete a sentence. It's kind of like a Mad Lib style. You complete this sentence, and it recommends to you what might be the best tool set for you. So here I'm going to go select, I want to do, let's say, web development, and using .NET and on Windows. So once I make those choices, it tells me what would be the best tool for me to download. And it tells you why we gave you that recommendation. These are some of the highlights. And what you can accomplish with this in the short term as well as in the long term. And then once you've downloaded the tool, what are some of the learning resources like tutorials, quick start guides, and just a guide on just generally getting to know the Visual Studio IDE or the integrated development environment. So these are all essential resources, learning material for a newcomer. So it provides you those, so you don't have to go hunting for different panes within Visual Studio IDE. Where do I go to learn how to write a basic ASP.NET web page? All that is what we aim to do here is give you all of that at your fingertips. And like we talked about earlier, all of this is going to take you to different places. So for example, if you go into Visual Studio Welcome Guide, that's going to take you to our documentation site, where we have all the Visual Studio, and it's going to show you typically what the Visual Studio IDE layout looks like, and it just gives you a very high-level introduction of some, the things you can do during your first weeks with Visual Studio that will help you make it your own environment and make you feel comfortable in your new home.
So this This is kind of interesting because what you were explaining before, where you said that we're looking at the funnel, right? We get like, I'm making up numbers, like we get 1,000 people to download Visual Studio. Of those, so that's the top of the funnel. Then of those, there's, let's say, 800 of them that finish the install. It actually runs all the way through and installs. And then out of those, there's 500 that starts up Visual Studio and uses it for one time. And then out of those, there's like some 100 that are left that uses it more on a regular basis. And so the idea is that the wider the funnel is on top and the less dropout you have in each of the steps, the better, right? You end up with more users coming out at the bottom that are like engaged users that use it regularly and all this sort of stuff. So what you're doing here with that way of acquiring is that you set people up for early success such that they don't drop off when they can't figure out how to create their first project, for instance. So from the web is actively part of how the journey in Visual Studio itself begins for especially beginners.
Exactly. So, you're a trailhead and you want to make sure you head to the right trail. I'm a hiker, so I guess this is a big analogy for me. So, you're at a trailhead. There are different trails. There are like a beginner level trail, there are intermediate, there are advanced trails. As a beginner, I don't want to end up on an advanced trail that's like 75 miles and 5,000 feet of elevation. I would get frustrated and give up. I won't have a good experience, and I may not come back again. So it's better if I got on the right trail to begin with. So that's kind of what this is. It helps you find the right product and the right tutorials at the level where you want to start, and it takes you on the journey. So exactly, Mads, as you said, by helping you go down the right path and find the right things for you at the very beginning, it makes that entire journey, you talked about, easier. So if you have a low-powered machine and we recommended VS Code for you, for example, you're going to find in your later stages that you were able to download and install it fairly quickly. It's very lightweight to start with, and you can acquire the extensions you want to just to get enough that gets your job done. Or maybe you're installing on your enterprise machine, a high-powered machine, and you're evaluating our products. So getting Visual Studio Enterprise Edition early on will help you do evaluation well, because you will get to evaluate the complete set of capabilities you're going to get as an enterprise customer. And then after 30 days, when you make a decision, you want to subscribe, you don't have to do anything else, and you simply just go from trial to a subscriber.
Okay, so that's really cool. I think I didn't know that, and I think a lot of people didn't know that, how active a role the download website actually can take in guiding the user to be successful using the product. It is not just a place that has information, right? It's launching the entire journey in a certain way. And you were mentioning that you can measure people coming in, and then you measure it, how they then go through the installer and creating their first project and so on. And we got a question here from Adrian. Are all these metrics, all this telemetry that we collect from that journey, is all that anonymized?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're talking about aggregated numbers, right? So we're talking about, like, I'll just go with your example from earlier. I think 1,000 people came and downloaded. 800 were successful in downloading or in installing, and then 500. So we're talking about the aggregated numbers and not a individual user and what's happening to them.
Okay. So that's good to know. Yeah, because that's kind of I think that's a really powerful thing, to be able to measure something from one property, right? From a website running somewhere all the way into Visual Studio, and be able to say, okay, people that does it this way, they go through the funnel in a certain way that leads to success. And of course, we want everyone to be successful using Visual Studio. So for us, it's a big thing for optimization, right? But then also you have to work really closely, I guess, with the Visual Studio setup team that owns the installer and takes care of the installation experience and so on. Is that the case?
I was just about to say that. So you're right on with that. So, how did we find out that we have to help early on customers to choose the right product. One of the key input that went into came from the installer team. So the installer team went out and ran a survey among customers who were uninstalling Visual Studio and asked them, hey, why are you uninstalling? Can you share with us what the main reason is? And in that survey, we found a good number of users were saying that I realized I downloaded and installed the wrong product for me after, I realized now this is too big for my machine, or I meant to get the free edition, community edition. I, by mistake, got the enterprise. So it is the input from that team. And it is that what we actually ultimately learned from customers who were uninstalling Visual Studio, that we learned that we are better off helping them really early in this stream. So it's interesting. That's where actually, that was one of the things that drove us to do more work on the front.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because that kind of makes the website a part of the product team of Visual Studio. Oftentimes, I think a lot of people, myself included, I think of a product website as a marketing page. Oftentimes, that it's where the marketing team can like put out the pretty pictures and screenshots and animated GIFs and videos of, happy people using the product and all that sort of stuff. But this is way beyond that. This is like you're actively influencing how the product is being used, how Visual Studio itself is being used.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So let me show you one other example of this might be, so we went into and we looked at the documentation a little bit. As I talked about, these links kind of take you to different places, specific points within documentation where you can find the information that will help you during week 1 of your time with Visual Studio to get your first app built to feel really productive. One other thing, so if we go down the download path, let's say I'm interested in getting the free community edition. I'm going to go ahead and download that. What you will see on the next page, this is where we say thank you for downloading Visual Studio. See that, start developing today. And this is very similar to what you had before. The convenience of having this page is that now you are downloading. While the download and the installation is in progress, you can have this up on your screen and go through the various resources that are available, right? In case, let's say you're having trouble with the installation, there's some error or issue, you can use the Get Help with Installing Visual Studio, which is another docs page that gives you step-by-step detailed information on how to install and what issues you may run into and how to mitigate them. And then was there a question?
No, I'm just saying, this is cool. So this is also specialized to web and cloud development, which is what you chose earlier, and C# and .NET, right? That was
exactly.
So the landing page, once you've downloaded, is now specific as well to making you the most successful, because if you're a .NET developer doing web, you don't need to know about new features in C++ or something like that, right? Or help
exactly.
So, so it's getting rid of the noise.
Yeah.
And being more precise, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, there's a lot of tutorials out there, because Visual Studio IDE, as we all know, is obviously a place where you can switch and work with different technologies and different languages at the same time if you choose to do that. So this helps especially for a beginner, helps them to simplify, remove the noise, as you said. The idea is to make it so that it's not overwhelming. It's with Visual Studio, often what we hear from customers is they love it. They say, oh, this is the gold standard for software development, but it can be overwhelming. Sometimes there's just too much on the screen, and can you just make it easy for me to focus on what I need to do today?
Right.
And this is in the same spirit of that. It's as a beginner or someone that just downloaded, these are some of the things because you said .NET, in this case, I think web development was your focus, what resources you need. Yeah, and then if in case, that's the sort of the personalized aspect of that. But let's say you change your mind, or you are interested in more than one thing. There are additional resources on this page. You can explore more tutorials. It helps you go into Python, go into C++, specific areas that you can learn in addition to your primary focus. You can also get to know some of the essentials about how to use the IDE, so you can get the best out of the of VS IDE itself, no matter which language you're developing in. And then, if you're an experienced developer, this is not your first time, and you've been using Visual Studio you're not interested in beginner information. We have a section here that helps you go into specific skill set area that you want to focus on and dive deeper.
I was just about to ask, what if you're not a beginner? And there you have it. Okay, so if you're already knowing what you want to do and all that sort of stuff, you might not read any of this, right? You just click download and you're good to go. You close the browser because you don't need anything else. You've installed Visual Studio so many times that you know exactly what to do.
Yeah, and that's nearly half of the customers who come to the download page.
That's kind of my question, like how many people download Visual Studio for the first time?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier about we get 5 to 6 million visitors to the site. We have about half of that, like we get about 3.5 to 4 million downloads. Out of that, our estimates are about 60% of the downloads are from new users. The way we think about new users is someone that has not downloaded or hasn't used Visual Studio in the recent past, like 12 months or 14 months.
Yeah. So it could be a contractor, for instance, that worked on it on a job like 2 years ago, but have been on a different contracting job using other technologies, and now on a new contracting job coming back to Visual Studio. That would count as a new user.
Exactly. If somebody has been off of Visual Studio for a long time, yeah, we would. So we obviously it's not an exact science. There could be someone who worked with Visual Studio for years, maybe, like you said, went off and did something else, became a program manager for a while, and then became a developer. So that happens. So that's why we also have to make sure that this page is not a dead end for those who are returning customers, and it has enough information for them. So we started sort of with improvements to this page with the beginner users in mind, because they are the ones who need a little bit more help. One thing we are going forward looking at is we are expanding our focus beyond beginner developers to see how can we make this page help people who are experienced developers but new to Visual Studio. So they may be experts with Python or even .NET. It's just that the IDE is new to them. So if they're coming from a different development tool environment, then how can we tailor our information for them, so we're not giving them a hello world tutorial for C#, which they wouldn't be interested in, but they would be more interested in how do I customize, how do I set a theme, how do I set command shortcuts that I'm very used to that may not be out of the box available from Visual Studio. How do I do that customization? So we want to provide that. And for returning users who've been with Visual Studio for a long time, how do we introduce newer technologies to them? How do we maybe talk about, help them see if code spaces or something like that would make their job easier and life more productive?
Okay, so that's kind of interesting because where is the boundary between we're recognizing that for some users that maybe already like really good programmers and all that sort of stuff, but first timers to Visual Studio, at what point can we teach people about like the different things available in Visual Studio, how to change to the dark theme instead of the light theme or whatever, customizations, personalizations, all that sort of stuff? At what point is that a responsibility of the website versus the Visual Studio product team that builds it and may have made that a little too hard to find, like once you're inside Visual Studio? So how do you figure out that balance?
Yeah. That's a great question. So that's where we are looking to customers to see what would help them the most, and we want to follow their needs and do the right thing. Honestly, right now, our thinking is, what is the best we can do in both places? Is how we're thinking about it. You know, customers are different, right? Everybody, you and I are different in our taste, and everybody is different in how they do their things. So maybe some customers will read the information on the website and sort of retain that after they progressed further down this funnel, and when they're actually in IDE on day 1 or day 2, like, hey, I saw on VSCom that I can set my theme to dark theme, and from what I saw, it looked very easy. Let me go ahead and try it. Or another person may not be paying a lot of attention to what's on the website. Hey, I'm on a mission today. I'm going to download. My goal is to get to the IDE. I'll figure out what I do there. So there they need help. IDE should be able to guide them. So we're starting out with on the website, providing the right information tailored to the individual taste. Eventually, depending on how that goes, depending on what our customers tell us, we will be obviously listening and talking to customers on an ongoing basis to see how the things we do on the web help them or not help them. And then based on what we learn, we will make more and more changes in the product to make the journey as pleasant and productive as possible.
That's really interesting. I know that Harshada, who's a PM, she's PM on running the Shell team, on Visual Studio Shell team, which is, or actually not the Shell team. That's what we call it internally. We call it the what do we call it? The IDE experience team, which is part of the core team.
Yeah.
And she's looking into like customization, and is there a way we can like streamline all these different types of customizations? Can we like make it easier to change font sizes or themes or whatever it might be, right? Extensions, all sort of like ways that you customize Visual Studio. But what you're saying is that a lot of this might actually been driven from what your team is doing. Like you're basically going ahead and iterating and trying out to see what information on the website would be helpful for people to know how to get started and customize, for instance. And you can then take that learning and bring back to the core Visual Studio core team and say, hey, here's some things that we learned. And then they can take it from there. And is that how it kind of works? That collaboration?
Absolutely. And I think the point there that I would like to bring up is we don't think of unlike in the past, I should say, we don't think of the website and the installer and the IDE as separate entities or completely like disjointed things. To us, they're all in the same continuum because a customer's journey goes through all these different parts of Visual Studio. So, like you said, Mads, what a program manager within IDE experiences learns from customers and problems or needs that she identifies, those have they come across to the website, to the installer. So and vice versa. What we learn from customers upfront, we share with them. Earlier I mentioned I also do customer satisfaction for Visual Studio, and that's the whole point of that. So when customers are working in Visual Studio, and every month we run this customer satisfaction survey. So I'll do a plug here. Those who are listening, if you're prompted for a customer satisfaction survey, it comes up in that gold bar at the top of your Visual Studio window. Please participate in the survey, because that's one of the main ways we listen to you. And you have the opportunity to give us, and we look at that feedback every month and discuss among all the program managers and figure out how we use that feedback to make our product better. So what we hear from there is what we see as hey, we are doing these improvements or changes in different parts, whether it's on the web or installer IDE. how is that adding up in terms of a customer feeling delighted, feeling like Visual Studio is working for them? And that's the how we hear back from you. And then once we hear back from you, that information spreads back out to all these various parts of Visual Studio and results in action over there.
Yeah. And I just want to echo what you're saying about those surveys, because, and we know it's annoying sometimes when you're prompted to, hey, give us your feedback. I can't buy a gallon of milk without the store sending me like an email saying, hey, well, how did you rate your experience? We get it. But
yeah,
that being said, Visual Studio is different. I feel like Visual Studio is different because it's a place you spend like half your waking life in, right? 8 hours a day, if not more. And so it's that things are smooth and works to your best benefit at all point in time is so much more important than, you bought some milk and how did the store do? And a funny thing is that, when it's not the same questions we ask every time, they're usually the first couple of questions are the same, but then they get customized depending on what kind of information we're interested in. So one of them could be like, we're trying to understand if there's an aspect that we need to look into. So we kind of ask some questions to figure out, is there some dissatisfaction in this particular area, or are there some opportunities that we have missed or something like that in certain areas? And having like people answer those questions make us realize that we have to either, no, it's all good, we don't have to do anything more, or no, let's dig into this and like investigate more, talk to more people and get to the bottom of this thing. And at the end of the day, it helps the product and therefore all the users as well. So yeah, I just want to make sure that, because we know it's annoying, but it really is a helpful thing.
I just want to add to that. That is such an important point. And I just want to add to that it can also be kind of like, it's not going to solve your problem today, right? You take the survey and the problem you experienced or the improvement you want to see, it's not happening today. It's going to take time. And we totally appreciate that. But what happens is, not only we listen to you through the survey each month, we also create a trend of what's happening month over month. So getting this regular input from customers helps us to see the improvements we make over time. When they ship out to customers, they become widely adopted by customers. Have they had the effect that we intended for them to have, solve the problems customers faced? So over 3 months, 6 months, we might see, like using your example, Mads, if a particular area we are asking about and worked on, did that actually, it's not enough that we ship features or improvements. Ultimately, how we measure things is, did that actually make a difference in your life, make your job easier? And that information gets back to us sometimes only 3 months later, 5 months later. But that's why we really appreciate customers who take the survey and take that few minutes to give us the information. And as developers ourselves and program managers, we can totally understand how, like, when you're in the middle of something, taking those few minutes can be, it's a cost, and we appreciate that.
Yeah. So one really good example of what you're saying, Sean, is the new Git tooling experience in Visual Studio. We knew from previously that people was very dissatisfied with Visual Studio's way of handling Git repositories.
Mm-hmm.
And so the team went out and said, okay, let's get to the bottom of this. And they started with the survey and tried to figure out what area to look into first. And then they took it from there. And so it started off from those surveys. And then after the fact, now they follow up on it. So because now they've actually released very recently the new Git repository tooling. And so now they can follow, well, is the trend going up? Are people like happier now than they were before? And that's super important to know, because if not, then they need to figure out why.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, everything gets better because of it.
Yep.
But so enough of survey. There was a lot of survey.
I know. I went off on a tangent there.
That's okay. Someone likes the new Git experience.
All right. Thank you. That's great to hear.
We have a question here from actually early on that I think I'm going to take now. Was Visual Studio created within Visual Studio? And it's kind of funny. I got this question Friday. Every Friday I do like a live stream of writing extensions, and someone was asking this question. And it's kind of funny. I tweeted out like some years ago, I think when we released Visual Studio 2015, I wrote a tweet that said, "Did you know that Visual Studio 2015 was built using Visual Studio 2015?" Because it is, right. It's whenever we I should do a show on how we do branch management and release management of Visual Studio itself. But so what happens is at some point in the life cycle of Visual Studio, right, we have released version, the eighth update or something to Visual Studio, and we're looking at, okay, should we think about like doing the next major version of Visual Studio? At some point, we branch off, and we start working on the new version of Visual Studio. Okay, new major version of Visual Studio. At that point, we ask all the developers in the Visual Studio organization to start dogfooding, start using this new branch of Visual Studio. So, for instance, let's say it was Visual Studio 2019. Whenever we cut the branch for Visual Studio 2019, like maybe a year or maybe 6 months or whatever, a year before we released it, all the internal engineers were using that version. And so all new features that they added from that point on was added in Visual Studio 2019. So that's how that works. Of course, a lot of Visual Studio is not being touched every time we do a release, right? So that was written in earlier versions of Visual Studio. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So just to kind of give maybe a holistic view of everything we're talking about, I just wanted to share this slide. So these are some of the things, sort of more of a, I don't know if it's exhaustive, but all the major things you can do as a customer, as a visitor, when you come to VisualStudio.com. Discovering, we talked about guided discovery, self-discovery of different tools. We looked at downloading. We definitely touched on learning about tools and features and staying on top of latest capabilities. But I just want to go ahead and show you real quick how, in case if it's not something you have already done, just so after this, our session, you know exactly where to go on VisualStudio.com to do that. So on VisualStudio.com, excuse me, right at the top you have, this menu where you can go in and look at different products, different download, buy, and things like that. But I'm going to dive, just as an example, dive into Visual Studio 2019 for Windows as the example here. And when I go into that, I'm going to see all the features, right? So the workloads and then the technologies. So I can dive deeper into a specific, let's say my interest is developing for Windows. I'm going to go into Windows. Maybe what I want to do in Windows. So you can see that downloading and documentation, they're all available. Maybe my interest is WPF. Maybe I know that coming in, that's where I want to do. So WPF and XAML, I can go specifically into that area, workload area of the product, and I can read about what that is and how, what I can do with that, and just learn at the top level. So this is how you can explore different features, workloads, and technologies in the Visual Studio product family. And once you have done that and you've made a decision, I want to download this particular product, and then you can go to downloads or from the home page. There are many places, or even right from here, you can get the download. We make that very easy for you. Mm-hmm. And you can also, one other thing I want to show is the downloads page itself. So let's say, we've been talking mostly about downloading the latest version of Visual Studio, which is what most customers want. But there are times, but that's not everything, right? But there are times when you want, let's say I'm interested in command line tools. I'm not necessarily looking to use the IDE for my need. I can go down here and look at all the downloads that are available. So if the latest version is what you need, it's right at the top. It serves your need. You go ahead and download and get going. But if you need to, let's say, for example, do a deeper comparison of the different editions, you can go and do a deeper comparison. And this is a page we recently created not long ago. So many of you who haven't visited the site recently might be new to you. It gives you a very deep comparison of different areas and features across the 3 different editions.
Oh, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
I get questions all the time, like what's the difference between community and professional? And
right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly why we created this page. Now, going back to the downloads page, one of the things I wanted to show you real quick is, let's say I want to do command line. And I'm not sure, I don't want to expand everyone, or even if I expand it, I just don't want to go through all of them, because there's quite a few tools here. So I'm just going to go and say command line or something like that and search for that. So that's going to bring up just the command line tools that are available.
This is interesting. I don't know if people actually know that we have those.
I know.
Tools, and I don't know if are they free to use, or do they follow whatever license you have?
Yeah, they are free to use. Like if I want to get the free build tools for Visual Studio, yeah, they're free to download that and just use the build tools.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That means that you can set up everything and build everything, like for your CI server or something like that.
Exactly.
Instead of installing the full IDE, just install the build tools. Done.
Right. Yeah, if you don't need the IDE for your specific scenario, you have the ability to, and do this. And it's not just command line tools, but it's also just in general. There are very few users who want to go and install an older version of Visual Studio because that maybe something they're doing. Maybe the rest of the team is using an older version, so they are not able to get to the latest for a short period of time. So there are those options as well.
But these are, so if I look at the version numbers here, these are the long-term supported versions of Visual Studio, 16.7, 16.4, and 16.0. So those are the ones that Microsoft has extended support for.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that makes sense. So you can snap to a specific version, for instance.
Yeah, and yeah, you can learn that as well, which ones have the long-term support. Okay, cool. So I don't know how much time we have, but I also want to mention that one of the things we are doing. Let me just go and I just want to show you one more thing. So we've been talking about, okay, this is all about downloading and getting Visual Studio and all of that. How about, I already know, like I've been with Visual Studio for a long time. I'm interested in sort of exploring the latest and greatest, what's happening now with Visual Studio. So as you explore the homepage on Visual Studio, you'll see this product announcement and preview section, which is dedicated to just that. Here I can see what are some of the new things, relatively newer features and capabilities we have added to Visual Studio. And let's say I've heard about rich code navigation, maybe from a talk or from some blog. There was a reference, and I'm like, what is rich code navigation? I can go ahead and look and learn more about rich code navigation. And this is what previously when we were talking about service or capability specific page within Visual Studio, here I can kind of see a definition. What is rich code navigation? Officially, how we think about it as a team, and then what it enables you to do, what's the benefit to you, and it's some of its major capabilities and language support and supported clients or tools, and then like Q&A. Once you've seen it, and let's say this is really intriguing to you or really connecting with you as something you want to try and use in your daily work life, you can, sometimes we run special previews we call private previews. And what they allow you to do is get access to very early bits. There may be still bugs that we're working through, but we want to get like customers' input very early on in the process, even before this becomes a public preview. So you can just go into, this is another thing you can do on VisualStudio.com is sign up for things like private previews. And typically what happens after you sign up is the program manager who owns the area will contact you and say, hey, thank you for your interest. Tell us a little bit more about in what kind of scenario you're going to use this feature, so we can help you to be successful in evaluating it, and give you the bits, and just to get more feedback from you on an ongoing basis, so we can fix any bugs and get it to a shape where it looks really good in the public preview and it's ready. And the other thing is, as someone that participated in private preview and excited about this feature, when it becomes part of the public preview or in the general availability, you know what this feature is and what it can do in and out. And on day one, you're up and running at full strength.
Yeah. Excellent. So it's just time for one question. And Sean, you used to run the developer community where people give feedback. So you have a lot of experience with that. So maybe you have some insights here. What was the most requested feature in Visual Studio that was actually pretty difficult to implement? Do you have any idea? Do you remember?
Mads, I'm sure you know a lot about this as well. You've been running the community for a while now. All right, so
I have an idea, but I want to hear your idea.
Sure. Yeah, so there are two things that come to my mind. Interestingly enough, if you go to developer community, and I hope that's kind of the case even now, from my experience, I saw user experience features are the most requested. I'm speaking to that most requested part of the question. You'd be amazed how much productivity impact user experience features have. Like the thing that comes to my mind is the vertical tabs in Visual Studio IDE. It was, at one point, it was the most requested feature. I'll be honest with you, I was surprised by that. I was like, is this really that valuable to customers? Like, that just goes to show, even if you're in the middle of things, you don't know exactly what makes the biggest difference to customers until they tell you. That's why community is so valuable. So, vertical tabs, the ability to have, vertical tabs in IDE, just be able to switch between code windows and things like that, be able to customize the vertical tabs and so on. I'm excited to say we shipped it, and I believe it was well received. So that comes to mind as the most requested feature. Was it pretty difficult to implement? I'm sorry, I won't be able to answer that because I didn't do the work on that. But it was. I remember working with the program manager who worked on it, and I wouldn't use the word difficult as much as it took a lot of care and a lot of very careful thinking through and working with customers to understand all the nuances of, it's not just about vertical tabs, right? What problem is it solving for you? How is it making your life better? Are we implementing it in the right way? That's what took a lot of work there.
And if I remember right, it was under a preview flag for a while. You had to go up into tools options, and then under find preview features, and then there's a checkbox for vertical tabs. And I think we had it there for many months, just to get it all right. And I know that they had some early ideas of how to do it, and they were using existing sort of extensibility points of Visual Studio, the existing APIs to do it. And I think they realized that they could not do it that way. And so what was potentially relatively cheap to do turned into like a brand new UI paradigm and into the core WPF of the Visual Studio shell itself. And so it grew, and it took much longer than I think that they thought originally. And it wasn't that it grew in scope, but in order to do it right, it was a lot of infrastructure changes that was needed. That was my memory of it.
Yeah,
but that was my idea too. Was like, that's the one I remember. It was the most requested for. I think to this day, I think it's still the one that has the most votes of all time.
Yeah.
Even though we shipped it over a year ago.
Yep. And I know there's a reference to live share in the question. One thing I want to add in that context is live share is taking an interesting journey on its own. Although I'm not directly working on it, I do know that they do a lot of experimentation. They try a lot of I've seen experimentation reports on, hey, we tried this and it works with customers. That's another avenue. Like we've been talking a lot about getting customer input through surveys and things like that. Another avenue through which we listen to customers is through data that we collect through experimentation. It says, this new feature, let's give it to some of the users and see how it performs versus the control. It doesn't have that feature, and then we learn from that as well. And that may be another talk, actually, on live share. I won't go too much into it.
Right. All right, cool. Well, thank you for that question. And that is all we have time for today, unfortunately. So, Sean, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Mads. It was fun. And thanks to everybody who joined us and who asked questions. We really appreciate it.
Yep. And as usual, we will be back next Monday. I guess usually we won't be back next Monday, but the Monday after this show is how that works. So make sure to tune in. We'll send a link out on Twitter before the show starts. Otherwise, just put it in your calendar. It's every Monday. All right. Take care for now, and see you then.
Have a good one, everyone.